Welcome. Thank you for joining our Customer Relationship Management Best Practice Series webinar. I'm Becky Melody, your hostess for today's presentation. Larry Isaacson, USDM Practice Leader, will be presenting. The discussion today will cover introductions, webinar logistics, our discussion topic, the CRM Compliance Challenge for Life Sciences. If you do not see the presentation slides on your screen, please click on the CRM tab at the top and center of your screen, and they will present. The USDM team is proud to have Larry in our leadership role. He offers 20 years in the application of GXP compliant IT technology in life science organizations. Larry has experience in manufacturing, software development, and clinical and laboratory contract services management environments. He recently led the implementation and validation of FDA-regulated global ERP laboratory and quality management systems. Major project there. He has experience in establishing IT and quality strategy project and change management programs. Larry has held the position of Director of IT in pharma, biotech, and medical device companies, and holds an MS in Pharmaceutical Research Sciences. USDM is focused exclusively in the life science domain. We're the market leader in providing IT, quality, and regulatory IT compliance and professional service solutions. Our various dedicated practices include PLM, ERP, CRM, GRC, ECM, clinical, and drug safety. We're the compliance partner for many best-of-breed vendors, including Agilent, Sparta Systems, OpenText, ECM, Oracle, and SAP. We are headquartered in Ventura, California, and we've delivered more than 1,000 successful projects with over 130 life science clients. We offer hands-on experience assisting clients under regulatory distress. We're great with remediation there, and we are the market leader for validation accelerator packs. The content today will be covered in approximately 30 minutes, and then we'll invite you to post questions for our team via the iLink message board on the left of your screen. Or you can join the discussion on LinkedIn and post questions there. If your question happens to be of confidential nature, please contact me directly. It's rmelody@usdatamanagement.com, and we'll have that on the summary presentation slides. Thank you again for joining us today, and now we'll turn the presentation over to Larry.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thanks everyone for joining us. Today we wanted to cover the emerging impact of CRM on the compliance domain in life sciences. This is something that has been creeping up gradually over time, and many companies are now turning their attention to it as they realize this is becoming a major conduit for information beyond supporting the sales force and forecasting. So what we're going to talk about is the factors driving the transition of CRM in the enterprise, what's been changing, where did it start, how did we get here, and where are we going, and what the new compliance requirements that come along with these new roles of CRM mean from a management and risk perspective. We also want to address another emerging trend with CRM is the outsourcing of it to a SaaS environment, along with many other applications. This is where we've seen the first adopters pushing out a major corporate application is typically CRM. And how to deal with that in terms of protecting yourself if you are running compliance transactions across CRM, what the SaaS migration could mean for you. And then we'll do a summary as well before questions. So as you're probably aware, what we call CRM, Customer Relationship Management, has evolved from what started as Salesforce automation tools back in the mid to late 80s, especially in big pharma, where major increases in the size of the sales force had occurred, and it was very difficult to manage the impact of these larger sales forces and be able to handle all the data, and laptops had become affordable at that time, so people started rolling out relatively crude Salesforce packages, which were typically standalone types of systems and weren't integrated with the ERP, which caused a lot of consternation in terms of people trying to integrate these as they went along. Often these focused on establishing a customer database, which often had been done in an ad hoc manner before, even in large companies, and so this sort of focused people on the content of their customer database. Obviously, we were tracking traditional field sales activities. Who are they visiting? What's going on? Who are the contacts? What were the results? And what are the next steps? Were typical of a sales call. And most importantly, was tracking much better than in the past the financials against budgets and targets for the sales force and calculating commissions, territory issues. So that was the focus originally of Salesforce automation, as it was called, SFA. And later, as the role of the salesperson evolved as more of a customer service rep, besides just doing detailing, they were able to use the CRM or the Salesforce tool to do order inquiry. So there was the first integration with, in a read-only manner, with ERP or warehouse management systems at that time. And many of these systems then were best of breed, so they weren't integrated ERP systems early on. So custom interfaces were utilized to enable inquiries for the customer in real time. At the same time, product presentation tools became integrated with these Salesforce tools so that new campaigns could be managed electronically by downloading them to the Salesforce, and even remote training in a crude way started early on in these tools. They were still considered Salesforce automation tools. But as things evolved, the integration to the back end, to call center and CTI, consumer telephone integration, computer telephone integration started. And so a more holistic approach to managing the customer interface was taking hold, using IT as an intermediary. So you had more sophisticated activities going on the Salesforce side, and then a back-end process that was creating a unified database of all the customer contacts. And that's where you first saw the concept of customer relationship management coming on in the 90s. Then also product utilization databases from outside sources were used to identify high prescribers to help target the sales force to do their sales calls in the most beneficial manner, and to segment the audience, so to speak, the customer base, by utilization profiles and patterns. In this way, the sophistication of Salesforce automation tools and evolving to customer relationship management packages expanded based on the interface to ERP modules. That became more and more of a classic standard expectation, and other systems along the way, such as in order to feed customer databases and try to reconcile different customer databases across the enterprise. And then more recently, you've really seen a big surge in CRM evolution as Web 2.0 has evolved to the point of being a real-time process. The latest CRMs include interactive communications and social networking interfaces, not just among the sales force, but also with their customers. And this is becoming a very interesting and dynamic area that has yielded great benefits to sales organizations. It's evolved from order inquiry to order entry and order management on the part of the sales force, along with the sample inventory management. This has always been an area of concern for pharma companies, managing how samples are handled, and with the new regulations associated with management of samples and the spending going on the marketing side, with new regulations, this becomes even more crucial. And the CRM is becoming a conduit for management of that, since that's the interface to the sales team and other field representatives. Customer complaints are now starting to come through CRMs, as the sales force is the customer-facing, the most direct customer-facing arm, along with call centers. The sales force and the call center are now fielding customer complaints. which also involve a new level of regulatory types of activity coming through that conduit. And even now, in terms of the pedigree laws going on with products and medical devices, as an example, in some cases, very highly specialized sales forces are involved with the product delivery and the uptake in case of surgical procedures, even to be able to track product through to the utilization of the product for highly specialized products. So there are special extensions to the CRM effectively going on to be able to track right down to the utilization point when the salesperson could be involved. So when you start looking at all this, there's definitely a substantial impact on the compliance requirements that come along with this type of transaction. So that includes GMP, PDMA, and even SOX potential issues as you start looking at individual transactions and their impact on traceability. The problem is that few legacy CRM systems are built or managed to compliance standards. This has just not been on the radar of product managers and project managers, and traditionally the sales force has been a separate area that the compliance, apart from the financials, was often not really an issue, and that's changing. So that creates a gap for it to be managed. One of the ways we like to look at USDM at impacts of changes in regulations and changes in business process on the enterprise is using a holistic model like this one. And what we like to do is look at the enterprise as a series of parallel processes, some of which are finished to start relationships and some which work in parallel and support one another. So if you look at this example, along with the dependencies in terms of systems, if you look at R&D, you've got your therapeutic target being transformed through a number of processes and supporting systems to a submission. Once the submission is made to the FDA and becomes a product, whether you're talking about a pharmaceutical agent or a medical device, you're in the sales cycle. And there's a sales cycle that's potentially unique to each industry and each product, where a prospect is going through a series of well-defined cycles to become a customer. And this is supported with a CRM or a Salesforce automation tool, a variety of different tools to track that process and manage it in order to get that first order. So at that point, you've now evolved that customer to be submitting orders, and a wide variety of systems exist to process that order and turn it into cash. And that's where a lot of the activity in terms of IT consideration is focused, and regulatory consideration. That management of that whole process is often the mainstay of IT programs. In order to make that work in a compliant manner in the life sciences realm, of course, we've got our parallel quality and compliance processes and systems, which are tightly coupled to the order processing and the logistics associated with delivering orders, and to ensure traceability is maintained and everything is in concert with its certified standards. And in this area, we have our quality management systems of a variety of types where CAPAs and changes to the process or to systems are resolved in a compliant manner, in a documentable manner for purposes of audit compliance. And underneath all of that, you've got your finance, IT, and HR, your shared services, with your underlying ERP and financial systems, your HRIS, and your software development and system development lifecycle, which enables you to evolve these systems and processes in a compliant manner in accordance with what's happening up here. So in general, you end up looking at these as individual processes from an IT perspective with integrations across them. Now, what's been happening, this model has evolved now to be more complex. Obviously, I can't, in this type of slide, demonstrate all the complexities and the gray areas. And some of these lines are not exactly solid lines any longer, but they're really dotted lines. But what's happening primarily is that the CRM now exists in two locations. It exists in the sales cycle, and it exists in the ERP order-to-cash cycle where issues of all kinds are getting resolved by the sales force or other field reps and turned into resolutions as part of the customer support model. And they're tightly coupled because we're much more of a real-time processing organization, and customer issues and complaints are processed through our systems in real time in a more unified manner. That's our goal overall with IT strategy, is to bake these capabilities in a compliant manner so that we can be a real-time responsive organization globally from a business model perspective. So this creates more complexity for the CRM and more complexity for the quality management side of the business, because now it's managing a dual-purpose CRM system, and that creates some challenges for the organization. So what's the impact of compliance requirements on CRM? As these new capabilities are being baked into CRM, and they're effectively becoming an extension of pre-existing regulated systems such as ERP, you are now having concerns related to the platform that CRM is on. Is it a qualified platform? Can portions of the application, as you start adding these capabilities to CRM, be validated selectively based on the function? Because there are certainly large areas of CRM in terms of traditional Salesforce management where you may not need to apply GMP standards for testing and validation. Clearly, change control becomes an issue when you start moving into this area in terms of being able to demonstrate that the system is working consistently, and that the associated quality systems, and it's all about auditability. If you're starting to route customer complaints through your CRM, which may end up going into other systems for processing, your quality system or your adverse event processing system, if that came to that, or other types of inventory management systems and reporting systems, if your CRM is in the path, it becomes subject to the same levels of rigor of consistency and quality that your ERP system would typically be assigned. Now, the architecture of the CRM could determine how significant that impact is. If you suddenly are layering these new types of transactions through the CRM, what's it going to mean to your architecture? If you've already if you've bolted your CRM into your ERP system and it's coming as part of a suite and it's running on the same platform internally, you may have a lot less impact to worry about because you've already got a qualified platform. However, if you're running it on a separate internal platform that's never been considered a compliant platform, you may find yourself needing to establish a qualified status for that CRM. And even though only a portion of the CRM may be utilized for these types of transactions, from a platform perspective, it's either all or none. It's either under control and it's well characterized as a platform to run these transactions through, or it's not. And then if it's a SaaS operation, if you've outsourced this, then you have a much greater potential impact to your platform. And why is that? Is because now you've extended out your model to a third party. And that third party, if they are supporting a regulated compliant application for you, has to meet the same standards and be able to demonstrate that it's meeting those standards in the same way that you're having to do typically for your internally hosted applications. It certainly isn't allowable from the standard or advisable to be telling an auditor, well, I've sent this out to so-and-so corporation who I trust implicitly. They're SAS 70, and so that should be good enough, if you haven't done the proper supplier audits and you've not got a qualification package to go along with it. Otherwise, people could circumvent the regulatory requirements by outsourcing their applications, which is certainly not the intent. So this is a key principle that I'd like you to keep in mind as you look at SAS in general for any compliant application, is that you can't accept a lower standard of documentation and compliance activities for IT than you would have to do if you hosted it yourself. So what does that mean in terms of your compliance model for CRM if you start moving into a SaaS environment, which is becoming extremely popular and, of course, financially is very justifiable? first look at what the model is when you're hosting internally in your own data center, which presumably has been set up to handle qualified applications, compliant applications. You've got your GMP, let's say, business process, or this could be GLP or GCP. In this case, it's CRM, which may be processing GMP transactions. And you've got an internal IT organization which is supporting that process with its own internal applications and infrastructure platform, which has been qualified within your own QMS, quality management system, by your quality organization. And you've got a shared set of SLAs around this process. That field represents a shared QMS and a shared IT SLA where up to a point people are all on the same page as what the standards are, and from an auditability standpoint you can document the standards that have been utilized to establish that compliance. So that's a very nice place to be from a compliance perspective. Once you move to a SaaS-based CRM or any compliant application, you now have two quality management systems. Your own, which you've now become a client of a vendor in this case for this important process. So you're now a client with your own internal quality management system that you're accountable for, and the vendor's quality management system, which you're also accountable for. You also have your own internal IT organization, which is managing this process in terms of how data is being moved back and forth. And you've now got a vendor's IT organization to deal with. And how are they being managed, and how compliant are they? Between your SaaS application and infrastructure platform and your GMP or GLP business processes or GCP business processes. So you've got this SLA gap for your IT organization, and you've got a GMP or GXP compliance gap that has to be addressed. And the question is, how do you address this gap? So if an auditor comes in and says, oh, I see you've outsourced this compliant application, along with it changing the platform and changing the provider, possibly even changing the database and possibly upgrading it if it's the same package, how did you manage that? You have to be able to have some good answers to that. How do you know it's still compliant? So one of the ways to help you address that is to start looking at what has changed. You know, we talked about this already. Before you were internally hosting it, perhaps, or perhaps you didn't have it at all. Perhaps you went directly to a SaaS organization. But the usual base is that you had this internal and some legacy system. Now you've got hosting management by a service provider, and there's a potential loss of control here. You don't have real-time oversight of your own staff any longer. The training activities and documentation that usually comes along with that is now happening somewhere else. On your database, you might have had a single tenant model with dedicated hardware or even a virtual system with a physical database server. Your outsourced solution might involve a multi-tenant database, or it may have a single tenant database but a multi-tenant application base. So you've got to be able to address the security and availability risk associated with whatever that vendor's model is. Obviously, you've got an internal quality system governance before. Now there's an external and an internal quality system governance, and that accountability has to be there from a supplier standpoint. In terms of auditability, when it's all internally hosted, you've got accessibility for audit at any time that you want to do it, or that the FDA shows up or an internal auditor shows up. You know where everything is. You know where the documentation is. You can respond much more quickly, typically, to an audit. If you now push it out to a third party, there's a negotiated audit process. You may not have unlimited access. You may have a certain amount of lead time that you need if someone wants to put their eyes on something and how it's being managed and what the logs look like. So there's some uncertainty now that you have to manage when you make this type of move. Obviously, you had internally determined schedules and policies for change control. If you're controlling the IT organization and the application internally, then you are really in charge of change control, and you can manage it in association with how the business needs it or doesn't need it. Just because the vendor sets up sends out a new package or even a security update to an operating system, that doesn't mean you have to apply it. You can assess it and determine yourself when it's going to happen. Now that becomes externally controlled. And what we've seen in real time is a significant clash of what the client or the sponsor of the regulated application would like to do and the vendor's needs, especially for certain types of SaaS organizations where they are using an agile development process versus what might be more typically a waterfall process inside a life sciences company for a heavy critical application. When it changes, it has big business rollout issues. It might look more like a waterfall than an agile development process. So these are some of the transitions you'll need to be able to manage. So a lot of what we do is, of course, helping people deal with this ahead of the fact or after the fact. We prefer to do it ahead of the fact. We recommend that you perform an on-site audit covering all the compliance areas from an IT perspective ahead of pushing out to a SaaS solution, whether that be CRM or any other application domain. This gives you a heads up of, what's the vendor's true compliance status, what's their mentality about that, how good are they at documentation, what's their partnership with their data center if it's not their own data center. And we have seen people be surprised later on after having done this move that it's actually another third-party data center, not the software vendor who actually is providing the software application itself. There are a lot of vendors out there who are getting into this business, but you'll be finding that logically they're using a third-party data center, which they may not have full control of. For that reason, obviously, it's a good idea to have service-level agreements as you would with any vendor. Specifically covering the SaaS supplier. So this is in addition to your licensing. This has to do with how the SaaS operation is being managed and the associated operational considerations there. By the same token, we also recommend for SaaS applications that are compliant that you have a quality agreement, a formal quality agreement with the supplier. Just as in manufacturing, when they're dealing with any types of external contract manufacturing, or if they're dealing with raw material providers or service providers, they have a quality agreement in place. When you start pushing these types of real-time applications out to third parties, we recommend this is a very big tool for you to get a true understanding of what the compliant models is going to be. And I think your QA organization will very much appreciate the fact that this is in writing. And the process of negotiating this is really where people really get a lot of understanding of what they've got in front of them. Obviously, you want to look at the databases and how they're being deployed, how they're managed, the interfaces between your vendor and you in terms of your corporate core systems are going to be qualified and validated. So if you've had this internally and now you're pushing these interfaces out over the web with secure transactions, that has to be addressed in terms of your compliance state and how that's being managed. Obviously, you want clear rights to your information. It's your information. You have to know what's going to happen if that vendor goes out of business or gets sold, and how you're going to be able to get access to it for audit purposes. Think about disaster recovery and backup, restoration if there's a need for that. And most importantly, we recommend that you have a qualification package for your specific deployment, not a generic one that says this is how we generally do things, and trust us, your system was deployed and tested the same way. You want to see the specific results for your deployment, whether that be a virtual machine or a physical machine, that shows that these specific activities were done, just as you would if you did this within your own data center with your own servers. By the same token, if you're having a disaster recovery service contracted for, you have to be aware of the fact that if that ever happens, if they do transition to a alternate site for disaster purposes at their own facility, that disaster site has to have a qualification associated with your application if you're going to run in production. If you're just running for purposes of emergency situations and not trying to run your production operation from that disaster site, that might be different, assuming you've covered it in your SOPs. but this is something that needs to be looked at. If you want to have a failover in real time to a disaster recovery and keep working in production, that site needs to be qualified just as the primary does at some level. Don't accept SAS 70 or ISO certification as equivalent to a Part 11 platform certification or standard of compliance, because that doesn't work for your hosting in your own organization as being sufficient. It's not sufficient if you outsource it to a third-party data center or SaaS provider. These are great foundations for that certification or that validation and the qualification process, because they assure you that they are following good IT practices and many of the principles are the same. However, the levels of Part 11 related documentation of that, along with how the facility is managed, the people are trained, etc., how the documents are handled, is much higher than what you'll find in SAS 70 or ISO, what we've seen. So we highly recommend you talk to us about this type of migration if you're contemplating it for a regulated application, or if your CRM has not been qualified in the past and now you're thinking of moving more significant inventory activities as well as customer complaints and things of that nature that may have regulatory consequences associated with them. So in general, CRM is evolving, and it's evolving rapidly. It is the conduit to the Salesforce, and the Salesforce is evolving itself in terms of consolidation of roles, and the world is becoming more and more complex in the field as far as regulatory compliance, not just GXP, but other activities as well. The compliance comes along for the ride as these new transactions are being layered onto these systems, and it's much easier to layer the activity and turn on a feature than it is to realize that that suddenly has a new compliance requirement that we didn't think about before, especially when people start interfacing it to ERP and other types of systems. Remember that if you move into this area and your CRM suddenly is a conduit for a regulated transaction, you've got to look at the platform it's running on and be able to say that it's qualified. Because if you're going to validate a portion of the application, it doesn't really hold water unless your platform is also qualified and under control. Typically, you'll find your SaaS vendors have not been equipped to qualify to the level that you would expect as being equivalent to your internally hosted applications and platforms, because they have been looking at a shared commodity architecture as part of their business model. This is how they can save you a lot of money, because everything's shared, everything's commoditized, highly standardized, and you'll have to pay a fee often for some customization to meet the compliance that is required. And it's worth it, because when the auditor comes calling, it's very important. This is considered a high-risk transition, and so when you're suddenly moving something off-site that is what used to be considered under control in previous audits, it's a big red flag to be investigated typically. And we recommend that you have a formal quality agreement with any SaaS provider for an application that could be considered GXP regulated. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Becky for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larry. Great information there. As Larry mentioned, now we'll open the floor for questions, and I'll give you a moment there to type them in. And while you're doing it, to let you know that the webinar has been recorded, and it'll be available on our website, which of course is usdatamanagement.com. Typically takes just a few hours for us to get it received and edited and out there. And you can share with team members or listen again if you care to refresh the notes. Let's see, our first question coming in is from John. He's asking, how can I know if my CRM is subject to regulation?
Well, the primary indicator of that is going to be a function of what transactions are going over the CRM. Depending on what department you're with, whether you're with IT or QA, you may not have direct visibility, or you may have direct visibility to what has been going on the CRM side. And one of the keys is to have a communication process with the sales organization, the marketing organization, and an awareness process where business people would be able to understand when they're moving into this domain. And so I would recommend, depending on your level of responsibility, that you at least ascertain what is going on with the CRM, what transactions are coming along, and I think you'll find that just the fact that typically, depending on whether you're a medical device or whether you're pharma or biotech, there is tracking requirements in the field for product and for orders and for samples potentially. And so given that's out there, the question is, how are they actually addressing it? Is it being addressed manually with spreadsheets in some other way? Typically, the CRM is the logical place to go because it's the place that the sales force is comfortable with. They've adapted it. It is their vehicle for all their critical information. And it's now going beyond laptops, obviously, to handheld devices of all kinds. They want to be able to respond real time to a customer complaint or a customer inquiry or a need to put an order in. I would suggest you ascertain, are any of these transactions coming through the CRM? And that would and if it's something that used to be done through ERP, often the legacy transaction model was the customer or the sales organization representative would call the call center and say, I need to put in a rush order, or they themselves might have had an interface to the ERP system, which is already validated, and put the order in that way, or the call center would put the order into the ERP. Now, if it's self-service through the CRM or some other vehicle, then that certainly has a traceability issue.
Thank you, Larry. Our next question is from Vita, and she's asking, what would be the content of a quality agreement with an SAS CRM vendor?
Well, that can get pretty complicated, obviously, but typically you're going to address the fundamentals of the same processes and issues that you deal with internally if you were being audited. So in effect, what you're effectively doing is saying, look, if I'm going to come out and audit you as a supplier, I'm going to expect these capabilities to be in place, that you have document management for your SOPs that people are using to manage my platform and my application and my database, that this training records associated with that, that I've got a qualification document that shows what the configuration is of the platform that my application is running on, and that there's evidence of a formal change control process that hopefully you would actually be involved with, especially if it comes down to the application. What we've seen is that there are various levels of services that are going on out there as people move to a SaaS platform. Some of it's just plain co-location, where you're putting your own servers and your own license applications out there, and there's some value-added services like backup, along obviously with network, et cetera, housing of your servers at a high standard. So that's primarily requiring some kind of qualification of how that's being managed and how is your backup and restore being handled. And then the question becomes, who's administering your application, who's administering the operating system, who's administering the database. And there have to be procedures in place, either at your site or at theirs, or both, to document how that's being done. So you would effectively, in a quality agreement, say, here's how my quality system, in terms of me as a client, I have responsibilities and I have interfaces and I have activities going on at my site that are linked to the third-party vendor, and I need to understand exactly how those two things are linked. So their quality system effectively becomes an extension of your quality system. Unless and I've actually seen this where people have extended their own quality systems out to the vendor, where they would train the vendor's people specifically in their quality system and have all the records in their own system, which has some big benefits for auditing, because I can come in and say, not only can I see the internal staff training records and change control, but I can see what's going on in the data center that's remote. And you would do the same thing for a remote data center if it was part of your organization. If you go out to a SaaS provider, you would expect that same kind of accountability.
Thank you, Larry. Our next question is from Fred. He says, I'm sorry, his first part of the question is, we're moving to outsource our CRM hosting. Who is responsible for compliance?
And depending on, if we knew what department he's in, obviously he may be with IT. And if he's with IT, the answer is a lot of people. I mean, every party involved with CRM or ERP for that matter, or clinical trial management, has a certain accountability for compliance. It may be the QA department is going to answer to an audit if it turns out that, and usually the problem is when something goes wrong, that's when people start asking a lot of questions. So as long as nothing ever goes wrong and there's never any incidents or deviations or events in an audit, you could get away with a lot. That's what people have experienced. But once something goes wrong, data is lost, someone has a transaction or an adverse event or something, some bad product got out or a sample got utilized in the wrong way and people start asking questions and looking for traceability, then suddenly the question comes up, well, is the system validated? And so then the question starts trickling back to IT, and it starts trickling back to the business, and it starts trickling, of course, to whoever's managing the supplier. Clearly the business has a substantial responsibility for certifying that the application that they're utilizing for their transactions meet compliance requirements. That's typically where the first level is. But they're often turning to, and they're responsive to QA for that. And QA is there to help them ascertain that, assuming the question was asked. And the part of it is to identify the fact that, oh, you know what? Now that we're going to start managing customer complaints through this process, we have to worry about the compliance associated with how we're managing customer complaints and how that links into our processing and reporting about that. So it's a shared responsibility, but you know, awareness is required to be able to answer that question. Someone has to raise their hand and say, what about this? So it's definitely something that, you know, we're trying to educate people here cross-functionally to make people aware of the fact that someone needs to ask the question as the next extension of CRM comes along, or the prospect of using SaaS as a very common architectural tool, let's say within IT. Someone has to be able to ask the question, what's this going to do to our compliance model?
I see. Okay, and Fred is confirming that yes, area of practice is IT validation. Thank you. And has part 2 of the question, how do I validate the interfaces from my ERP to outsourced CRM services?
Well, there's a variety of approaches. One of the most important things that you need to think about when you're dealing with interfaces of any kind is, where's the boundary of control? If you're dealing with a third party that may or may not be validated or qualified, which is very similar to what people deal with EDI as an example, you have to be able to know what you can control and can't control and what you can be accountable for. So at some point, information is showing up for processing in your validated application, and information is going out from your validated application to a third party. And your platform that you are controlling is the qualified platform. So you may have a staging area where files are coming in and going out from, or it may be a third-party broker where information is coming through. Ultimately, you have to define what that boundary is and what your criteria are going to be for testing its integrity. And that's what you typically do in a validation process. The vendor, on the other hand, needs to be a party to that and agree in a functional spec what the expected conditions are of that interface. How many variables are there? What are the known states that it can take? And how are you going to process it? And the goal, of course, is to avoid any unvalidated data effectively getting into your validated system. It starts with a specification, a functional spec that takes in both sides of the equation and defines the error checking that's going to go on, and where does the qualified platform start? If you're using web services and an EDI transaction is being executed, you want to know that execution is being done from a qualified and validated framework. And that way you can characterize it. And also you then can define change control so that you know it's going to stay in a state that you understand before something else changes.
Terrific. Thank you again, Larry. Appreciate that information and a good Q&A session there. Looks like we should wrap up here. We're running out of time, certainly. I appreciate you all joining us and staying with us throughout the questions and answers there. We do trust the information shared has been helpful, and we would welcome any comments and feedback, additional questions after the fact. The feedback can assist us with continual improvement, and we're certainly open to suggestions for future presentation topics. If you're having a problem that you need some direction or help in solving, certainly we'd be willing to have sideline conversations with you there. We do encourage you to join the discussion on LinkedIn and to visit our website to take a look at the upcoming topics that are being presented in the near future and to listen to the previously recorded sessions. We do have them posted as well across the various practice areas that USDM supports. On behalf of the USDM team, we appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and to team with you towards excellence in compliance. Good day.